Alright, since I can't be there with you guys today, I just want to take a couple minutes at the beginning and do what I would have done in person, which is just sort of review what we talked about with the Cold War. You're going to be spending this week with Vietnam, looking at what it was, why we were there, what we got out of it, what we didn't get out of it, how it affected the U.S. And you're going to start that discussion today with kind of an overview video that you'll have an open note quiz over tomorrow. But before we get to that, I just want to review where we're at in the Cold War and how we got there. So what we've talked about for the Cold War so far before break is we talked about the origins of the Cold War. Okay, so we looked at communism, capitalism, communism as an ideology, capitalism as an ideology, and we talked about how those two things don't align, they don't mesh. There was really no way for one to coexist with the other. Communism, everyone's treated equally. There should be no big gaps between rich and poor, people sharing things together, everybody works towards a common goal. Capitalism, on the other hand, you get what you get based on your contributions to society. So the more that you contribute, the more money you have. It's okay if someone's rich, it's okay if someone's poor, you're going to get paid based on what you do. And those two things don't really go together. So we said the origins of the Cold War started with communism and capitalism and the differences between those two. We saw the disagreements and the distrust formed between the former allies, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, who were fighting the Japanese and the Germans, along with the British during World War II. And that distrust spreads and slowly grows and morphs into a disagreement as to what the world should look like after World War II, which is that ideological difference that we just talked about, and it's that leads to the Cold War. And we said the Cold War starts in World War II or right at the end of World War II, depending on what you want to, how you want to debate it. But it's not actually one set event. But it's a series of disagreements, distrust. It's us realizing and the Soviets realizing that there's no way to get rid of the other side, and that this is going to be a fight for influence around the world that takes place in Eastern Europe, South America, China, Southeast Asia, and pretty much everywhere over the next 40 or 50 years. For the U.S., we talked about the Truman Doctrine being sort of the first policy issue that we come up with for the Cold War. So we said that under the Truman Doctrine, the U.S. is going to give aid to governments at risk of becoming communist. Any government that's at risk of becoming communist. It doesn't have to be a democratic government. It's just governments at risk of becoming communist. And we talked about Turkey and Greece a little bit as being the first time the Truman Doctrine was applied. And the Truman Doctrine really at first was about money and maybe some military aid, but mostly about money. And then that's going to morph into or change into containment policy. And we talked a lot about containment policy. It's the idea we can't get rid of communism, but we can not let it spread. Okay, so we're going to contain it by kind of whatever means necessary. And we talked about you can be anything you want, just not communist. We would support you if you were a dictator. We would support you if you were a democracy. We would overthrow you or try and overthrow you if you were a communist democracy. We didn't care as long as you weren't communist. So kind of that was containment policy. And that's going to look like a whole bunch of different things. One of the things that containment policy said is it said that there was going to be a long, drawn-out conflict. And since we knew that, we created a permanent military and security establishment, which was different than what we had before. So we talked about the National Security Act creating the National Security Council, which was created to advise the president on matters of national defense. Never happened before. We never had a permanent group that was designed to do this. We only did this kind of stuff when it was at war. The National Security Council was going to need advice to be able to give the president, so we created the Central Intelligence Agency, which is basically our spying agency. They operate outside of the United States. They collect information around the world, what is happening around the world, so the president can get good information via the National Security Council to make decisions on what do we do next. And it also created a permanent Secretary of Defense designed to coordinate military actions among the branches of the military. So with the Cold War, we're going to see a huge increase in military spending, a huge increase on technology spending, to make sure that we are, prepared to fight if we have to, even though we don't want to directly fight the Soviet Union. One of the reports that we talked about from the National Security Council was NSC 68, which basically made the U.S. the world's police force. And I said that was huge. That's where it came from. They looked at the world and said, okay, here's the problem. The problem is there's no strong leadership for the capitalist side, and if no one leads, in the absence of leadership, the communist side's going to win. We're the only one at that point that we felt could do it with our military powers that we had, with nuclear weapons, with the advanced technologies that we have. So we take on the world's police force, that role, and we're going to intervene around the world with the military and with the CIA in places like Egypt, Iran, Guatemala, Cuba, a whole bunch of different places that we're going to try and apply containment policy. The other thing that we talked about was the Korean War, which was the first large-scale test of containment policy. We intervened in other places, but in 1950, Korea becomes this police action when North Korea invades South Korea. The United Nations troops, led by the U.S., are going to stop that invasion. And we said that our original goal was to make the Korean Peninsula democratic, and then as soon as we kind of started getting closer to eliminating North Korea, the Chinese sent troops across the border, and we realized that we were inching closer to World War III. So there was a disagreement between General MacArthur and President Truman. MacArthur wanted to fight the Chinese, and he wasn't, he didn't care. He would use nuclear weapons if necessary. He just wanted to win. President Truman wanted to avoid World War III. The disagreement became public. Truman fires MacArthur. Long story short, the Korean conflict, it's not technically a war, we never declared war, ends with nothing being changed. The border basically is going to stay the same place, and things are going to be the same way that they were before. But in some ways, it was successful application of containment policy because we don't have any spread of communism. In other ways, North Korea is permanently communist, so it wasn't a successful application, so it depends on which side of the coin you want to look at. But you need to understand the Korean War is that first major test of containment policy. It starts during President Truman, his administration. It ends during the Eisenhower administration. And during the Eisenhower administration is the first time that we really start looking at giving military aid. Well, during Truman and Eisenhower is the first time that we start giving military aid to Vietnam. So right about the same time is when we see these things overlapping. That's the review. That's where we're at. Your job today is to get through the video notes. You're going to have a quiz over those tomorrow. So it's a 17-minute video. Copy and paste your questions from the Edpuzzle video into a Google Doc that you're going to call Vietnam Overview Video Notes. You'll be able to use whatever it is you have tomorrow on your quiz. It'll be a quiz grade. It won't be too bad as long as you have the questions answered and you're ready to go. So don't waste too much time because it's going to take you a little bit of time to get through. If you finish that, there's some cool pictures, kind of a slideshow things that I have a link on Chalk Up for you guys to look at. That'll kind of show you some of the iconic pictures from the Vietnam War, and we'll pick back up that discussion tomorrow. Good luck, guys.